So hello and welcome to Farscape's contracting webinar. Thank you very much for joining us today. The webinar is going to last for about 45 minutes. We'll be talking probably for about 25-30 minutes of that, and then we'll be making sure that we leave enough time to run through any questions that anybody sends through. In terms of questions, we're going to wait until the end, and then we can just see that we've covered everything that people have asked rather than trying to answer questions as we go along. But please do send questions on your control panel to the top right of your screen as and when you think of them, and I'll be keeping an eye on those as they come in. So in terms of today's agenda, just in terms of introduction and expectations, please do send your expectations and any specific points of interest that you have, and we'll make sure that we cover those at the end, as I say. From our point of view, we want to make sure that we meet your expectations. We are focused on your objectives as we go through the webinar, so that will help us just to stay focused. We're going to start off, after I've introduced our presenters today, Neil and Dina, we're going to start off with a practical contracting demonstration to give you an idea of what a contracting session looks like and feels like. And in order to do that, we're then going to introduce you to a model that we've developed here at Farscape, which is called the Torso model. And really, we've designed this to help you remember what to pay attention to when you are contracting with somebody. We're then going to spend a little bit of time looking at the impact of contracting. It's really easy to slip into a place of missing this out, but it really does have a significant impact. So Dina and Neil will be sharing their experiences of the impact that they feel it has when they're coaching. And then finally, we'll be having, as I say, the question and answer session, where I'll be keeping an eye on the questions that you have sent in as we go through and making sure that we cover those. So in terms of who is presenting today, just a quick introduction. My name's Ruth Moody, and I'm the Managing Director here at Farscape Development. Farscape is a behavioural learning and development company, and we're really interested in helping people to recognise and explore their potential so that they can deliver better results in the roles that they're in. And we particularly specialise in and around the area of personal impact. And for us, personal impact is key when coaching, and contracting really helps to make sure that each person is aware of the impact that they're going to have on the other and how they can make sure that that impact is as positive as possible. My role in today's webinar is going to be to keep an overview of the questions that come in so that we make sure that we answer those. And so now I'm going to pass over to my colleagues, Neil and Dina. Neil is our commercial director at Farscape, and he's going to introduce himself and then pass over to Neil. So Neil, over to you.
Thanks, Ruth, and morning to everyone on the webinar. I hope you find today's content useful in your own coaching practice, or indeed to those of you that are out there who buy coaching and bring coaches into your organisation. Brief bit about me. I head up the sales and customer experience function at Farscape, but also I play a fairly lead role in developing coaching programs for our clients, and specifically, more recently, trying to build coaching into our development programs rather than them being just bolt-ons at the end or standalone even. And as well as that, I often get involved directly in the coaching myself because it's an area that really interests me. Brief history on me. I spent about 20 years in the field of personal development under many different guises. In my early career as an outdoor instructor, an expedition leader overseas, then became a teacher and worked in education for several years. And then latterly, my role was as a director in a business unit of a FTSE 100, where we focused on promoting developmental travel to young people, working in the area of youth development. And then latterly, as my role in Farscape is as a coach, working with senior leaders in our clients' organisations, helping them work on areas that they want to resolve. In relation to today's topic, I've got a particular passion for the role that environment plays in embedding learning on our programs. And it's a key part of everything we do when we're designing programs with clients, to think about how the environment can really impact on having a positive learning experience. And I suppose the most recent expression of that for me has been some recent master's research that I've just concluded on the impact that venue selection can have on the quality of a coaching encounter. We're not going to cover too much of that today. We might touch on it briefly as one of the things maybe to discuss in contracting, but it's going to be a future webinar that we'll be doing in a while, so we'll keep you abreast of that. And if you hadn't guessed, I'm a Brummie. So with that, I'll hand over to Dina.
Hello, everybody. I'm Dina, as Neil says, and I am not a Brummie, which you'll probably guess by how I speak as well. I'll give you a very brief idea of the background that I have. I've been an executive coach for just over 25 years, and my background prior to that was as a performer and theater director. And my segue into coaching was really based on the coaching that I received myself to look at my own stage fright. And overcoming that led me to be really very, very interested, as I still am, passionately interested in confidence and what that means in the workplace, or what that means when you stand up in front of people. And most importantly, when you sit down in front of another person in order to help them grow, i.e. as a leader. And so today, when we're looking at this really crucial aspect of coaching, which is contracting, I hope I'm very aligned with Neil's desire for your outcomes, and also to look at it not only in the realm of coaching per se, but to look at it when you are in a meeting with a lot of other people, when you're embarking on a project, when you're in an appraisal situation. And we'll talk a lot more about some of the other contexts in which contracting is useful as we move on today. But what we'd like to do is to really show you, demonstrate for you a contracting session that would be a preamble to a coaching session, a coaching conversation. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take you through some of the aspects that Neil and I are going to talk through, I as his coach. And we're going to look at timing. We're going to look at how long we're going to talk. We're going to look at how we might delineate that timing, etc. And we're going to look at the outcomes, or the outcome that Neil has for the session that we are going to talk about. And what I want to say is that Neil and I aren't going to have the conversation. We are going to do the contracting part of that conversation, but outcome will be discussed there. And you'll see why it's so important. And we're going to look at the roles that each of us are going to play in the session that we do, and what style of role that is. So how directive he might want me to be, how challenging he might want me to be, what if he wants to actually get up and do some practical work, that kind of thing. And then we're going to look at how we might get in each other's way. So we'll look at what Neil might do as the client to get in his way, to stop himself from moving forward. And equally as important, what I might do to get in his way. And hopefully that will be clearer as we demonstrate it. What I want to say is that as we are working, what's really important is not so much to pay attention to this piece, to really listen and learn from the things that I ask Neil as a coach. And what I also want you to be clear about is that we deliberately have not actually rehearsed this because we wanted it to be fresh for you. And also, it helps if it is actual dialogue. So the fresher it feels to us, it'll feel that fresh to you. So Neil, are you ready to begin our conversation?
Yeah, ready to go. Okay,
so listen. I know this is weird because we've got people listening. I think we arranged to have a 10-minute coaching, contracting conversation. Mm-hmm. How long, when we're finished with the contracting, how long do you want the conversation to actually be?
So if we take this offline afterwards, mm-hmm. I've probably got about 45 minutes straight after the webinar to actually do the coaching.
Okay. And how do you want me to track time, both in terms of now in the contracting conversation and when we do it? Are you happy for me to sort of tell you every kind of 10 minutes how much time is over, or, how much time we've got left, or how do you want me to track time?
Yeah, no, that's useful because I mean, I'm quite precious about time, but I know once I get into a coaching conversation, I get lost in the conversation, and so I think what never really works for me if I suddenly realise we've got a minute left and we haven't got to the crux of what I wanted to discuss. So yeah, if you can, I'm quite happy for you to call time early so you can sort of give me a heads up that we're about to run out.
Okay. And I will do that. I'll kind of track time at intervals so that you don't get shocked by that's and we're out of time, so it feels almost like a therapy session. I won't do that. And how about I know that we're going to have a conversation when we're offline. Is that going to be the only conversation you want to have on the issue, or do you want to do a follow-up, or do you want to talk about that at the time? Do you want to hold space for potential follow-up?
Yeah, well, let's see where we get in the conversation, because I know it's a genuine issue that I want us to discuss later. So my gut feel is that we won't get to the end of it in 45 minutes. So yeah, my perception is that we're going to need more time to come back and revisit it at another point. So maybe we could agree to set that up at the end of the session.
Okay, so I'll make a note that we'll do that. Okay, so we have about just over 5 minutes left in terms of contracting, and I'd like to talk to you about what is it you want from the conversation that we're going to have. If it really is useful for you, what will we have done?
So just coming back to your point, to the fact to notice that we have got an audience, and at the risk of disappointing the voyeurs out there, I'll keep the issue under wraps. But in terms of the outcome,
oh man, you're so boring.
I think for the end of that 45 minutes, I guess the issue that I'm going to bring to you is I'm keen to understand where it comes from. It's something that I've been working on for a long time, and I think I've been avoiding understanding not how I deal with it, but where it stems from. So I think if by the end of that 45 minutes I got a better insight into where that issue stems from, I think I'd be quite happy.
And how would you know that you gave yourself that insight?
I guess I'm looking for a bit of a light bulb moment, because I think when I've worked on this issue before, I've come up with things that I already really knew, and none of it felt real enough to be the real underlying issue. So yeah, a bit of a light bulb moment.
And if you had that light bulb moment, what would that allow you to do?
I think it would feel as though that is the real source of the issue, because I know from previous experiences of having those light bulb moments that they're normally genuine, and I think it would then give me a platform to then explore the issue in more depth with you at a later date.
And how would I know that you found the real source, that you had got that light bulb moment? How will I know that?
I think it'll be pretty obvious. Yeah, I think when I notice it, I'll be quite verbal in letting you know that I've noticed it.
Okay. And is when you have reached that light bulb moment and you found the real source, and you've got a kind of a platform for our discussion. When we meet offline, is there a particular thing that an action that you will be able to do better than you do now? Is there an action that you'll take away?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess it'll depend on where that light bulb moment comes in a 45-minute session. Okay. I think if that comes early on, I'd be then keen to explore, okay, what actions do I then take away I think it'll be more reflections rather than actions, to say, okay, what do I do with this now? How do I, having noticed this and having had that sort of breakthrough moment, what do I do with that? So maybe where you could be helpful there is to help me explore what I might take away to reflect on.
Help you explore. Okay,
Yeah.
so if my role, if you like, is a kind of co-explorer, tell me a little bit more about that role as co-explorer. How do you want me to help you explore?
Well, using that analogy then, I think the role that would be helpful to me for you to play is trying to push me to explore areas that I might not have tried by myself.
Okay.
I think maybe up to now I've explored the safe areas where I already knew what the outcome would be. So I guess I need you to try and notice and identify areas that you might get the perception or the feeling that I'm avoiding.
Aha.
So I'm happy for you to be the one that probes those areas and pushes me into that corner.
Okay, so tell me a little bit more about that style of exploration. How do you want me to push you so that it's effective for you, to help you notice and identify those areas? How do you want me to do that? What's the style?
I don't need you to be too supporting or empathetic. That doesn't really work for me. I guess I need you to be quite direct. If you notice me avoiding, then notice it and play that back to me, quite directly. That works for me. I like to make that progress. So be as direct as you think I can bear, and that'll be a fair bit.
I'm happy to do that, but I'm also conscious that that directing and challenging, I can do that. I quite like doing that. But I also know that because I am quite a nurturer, that sometimes when a client asks me to be direct and challenging, I really go for it. So I will go for it on the proviso that if it's too much, you'll say, will you?
I will, absolutely. I doubt you'll manage to go that far, but if you do, I'll let you know.
Okay, and I seriously may check. Will that be okay?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Okay, now how could I get this wrong? How could I get in your way and stop you from really finding that real source and having that light bulb moment? How could I get in your way?
Once you've asked a question that's, that you feel is an area to explore, I do need that space to think. Interestingly, unlike how I am in day-to-day meetings, in a coaching session, if I'm being coached, I like that space to think. So I guess I need you to be willing to hold that silence until I've explored internally, and then I'll say out loud what I've come up with.
Okay, really happy to do that. Really happy to do that. Okay, how might you get in your way? What might you do to stop yourself from finding that real source, that light bulb moment?
Given the fact that I've failed on coaching myself on this, there's a chance that I might slip into giving you answers that I've already given myself that I know aren't the right answers.
So how can I be ecological about that and check that that's not what you're doing?
Yeah, difficult one, because I'm quite good at doing that to myself. So you're going to have to bring all your skills to notice it, and then if you notice it, tell me.
Okay, so I'm wondering if a clue might be that you answer quickly, that you don't give yourself space to think.
Yeah, that's a good observation. Yeah.
Okay, so it might be that if you do answer quickly, I might just check it. I'm not saying, but I don't want to be a policeman, but I will check it and follow my intuition on this very carefully.
Yeah, no, that would be good actually, because I think there is a good chance that if that happens, that's probably been what's happened for me, that I've just rolled out an answer that I've already come up with in a previous session. Yeah, that
Okay.
would be really that would be really useful, actually, if you can, play that back to me when you see it happening.
Okay. Okay, I will do that. Is there anything else that could get in the way? Presumably you're going to be having this conversation at home. How are we going to handle if we're interrupted, if your phone rings, or kids come in, or are you going to? Is that possible that anything else could be an obstacle with us? Interruptions or anything else?
Yeah, no, I think when we'll agree this offline as to when we're going to do it. But I think no, I'll make sure we do it when I don't have any interruptions. Because I'm a bit magpie-like. If there's something bright and shiny around, it'll distract me. So I'll make sure I'm not in that state.
Okay. So is now a good time to start contracting? If we got enough, I feel like I'm ready to begin the conversation. Do you have enough to begin?
Yeah, I think that'd be great, and I'll look forward to our session.
Seriously, me too. Absolutely. Okay, great. So I hope you guys found that useful, those of you who were listening, and I want to also say to Neil that it's very brave to be coached in front of other people. It's such an intimate thing to share in a seminar. So I'm grateful. I really am, and I hope, audience, that you got something from that. Let's look at the torso model as a way of kind of looking at the things that Neil and I covered in our conversation. So we looked at timing. We looked at how long we were going to talk in the contracting, but also equally important, how long we were going to spend in the conversation itself, and some of the things that might affect the timing. And I got as clear as I possibly could as a coach about what good looks like, feels like for Neil, what he absolutely specifically wanted out of that. And it's funny about outcome, because outcome is absolutely, you could do a whole coaching session just on outcome. So many things come out, and you probably noticed that watching or listening to that conversation, the richness that comes out of outcome. And also the intimacy. You're looking at an evidence procedure and how somebody represents the thing that they want. So, and the clearer that you can be with that, the better. And then we looked at the roles that we were going to play, and I thought that was there was a lot of information there in terms of what Neil actually needed from me as a coach, which is very aligned with the style of coaching that he wanted from me, and the environment, the style of the environment that we were going to create there, one with a lot of challenge, a lot of direct, and also the style with a lot of silence in between, so that the client in that situation had time to think. And we looked at some of the things that might get in the way of Neil reaching his outcome. And it's important to look at those things so that you know how to deal with them when they come. And often when we're contracting, it is the thing that people shy away from. But it is so important, because of course, if you are conscious of the obstacles, sometimes they don't even come. So it's a fantastic way of avoiding them rather than not talking about them. Obviously, not talking about them can help them be sometimes more present. So that's the torso model, and I think what might be useful is to take those apart a little bit more diligently with some questions that we've looked at. Let's start with timing. Let's look at some of the issues, some of the things that we talk about. And Neil, I just want to talk to you for a second and ask you, when it comes to timing and your own coaching practice, what's important to you about that? What are some issues that you make sure you cover when you're looking at timing?
Well, it's interesting. I think it was interesting when you and I were going through the prep for this session, that the obvious ones always come up around, what time have we got available for the session? And I'd imagine, most coaches cover that off quite quickly. But I think one of the important ones for me, and certainly from talking to a lot of my sort of peer coaches, that often comes up as an issue that at the end of a session that they wish they'd discussed at the start was around that issue of endings. And once you've agreed with the client how long you've got for that session, be it an hour, 2 hours, whatever it is you've agreed, that how do you deal with the end of that session? So if the client gets really into an issue and it only seems to appear 10 minutes before the end of the session, how do you deal with that and actually signposting that before you start with them to say, okay, if this occurs, what are we going to do? What are we going to agree to do? Are we going to continue over the time? The coach might have their own issues about whether that's the value of their own time and the billing of that, or whether it's about whether the client's got the time to continue afterwards. So I know certainly for me, I really focus on that. In addition to that question about how much time have we got, is when that time finishes, what do we do next? Do we run over? How long do we run over? How do we follow up afterwards? So that you're more prepared when that situation arrives.
Wow.
So I think that whole thing about endings, and certainly if it's the first session of a program of coaching sessions, actually talking about what the end of that program might look like. So we're engaged to coach for 6 sessions. Obviously, we'll contract at the beginning of each of those, and we can talk about the timing individually. But what are we going to do at the end of this? What are their expectations for the end of the program, and how we finish the relationship? How as the coach do you make sure that the client, or you don't become a crutch for the client, and these sessions continue on and on into the future? So I think it's really important to have those conversations early on in the relationship, even if not at an in-depth level.
I agree. And I would say that that's important not only in the context of a coaching situation, but I would argue that that's also equally important in a business situation. Okay, I'm going to give you some, we're going to talk about how you might move forward on this issue. I have got 10 minutes. That's all I've got. And how might we kind of negotiate through that in future meetings so that you don't feel unsupported, but are also so that I don't go over the time that I have with you. And I think you're absolutely right that is really important in talking about timing. I wonder if we might move on. Oh, sorry, you have something else.
I just had one quick one on the structure of sessions. How do you bring that up in the contract and about how you're going to structure a session, and what particularly do you discuss with a client about how you're going to structure it?
That is a really good question, and I think, reflecting on how I always begin. I begin every session with a contract, and clients know that the first thing that we do is we contract. And we talk very much about the outcome. And then when we get to the style part, that's when the real structuring really begins, or the style. Okay, so this might be a time where we both stand up on our feet, and you show me how you stand in front of an audience. Or it might be that we structure this session where we go outside and we take a walk for an hour. Mm-hmm. And then we come back and we talk about the conversation. So I think in terms of contracting, the structure each time is a really good thing to touch upon, because it will be different. I mean, yesterday I had a session where the structure of the session was we did a Gestalt chair work where she sat with 2 different parts of a decision that she was trying to make. We decided to do that in the contracting part.
Right. Okay. Great.
So I'm. Speaking of timing, I'm conscious of time, and I wonder if we should talk about outcomes. And I have to say, I think outcomes, you could do hours on outcome forming, and I think probably the most important aspect of the contracting process is this, because sometimes after you finish the outcome forming, you're done. It's a really important aspect. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think. I mean, I certainly notice myself, it's the area that if I'm not consciously following this model when I'm contracting, it's often the bit that catches me out, and I don't spend enough time on it. And I agree with you that it's probably out of the 5 elements, it's the one where, and this isn't necessarily about setting the goal for the coaching, it's about having that clear understanding of, in this session that we're in now, what will good look like at the end of it in terms of how the session is run. It's not necessarily specifically just about the coaching goal for the client. And I think that's sometimes the bit that we miss, and then, as you say, it comes out later on in the coaching, whereas actually if you spend more time on this right at the beginning, it actually gives you more time in the coaching to then genuinely explore the issue that the client wants to have more resolved.
Yeah, absolutely. And also for me, particularly in an executive coaching contract, I would always check the ecology. Is this outcome, how does this outcome relate to the outcome of your program? And then there's also here, on this slide, really important, the tri-party agreement. So how will this outcome affect the organization?
I mean, interestingly, Nick, I know we talked about this a bit before we started. I know from conversations with lots of coaches and lots of organizations that have, done coaching with us, that there is a general sort of misunderstanding or unsureness about how to make these agreements work well. I mean, in your experience, because you've got 25 years of it, can you give us, the audience, any examples of where you've seen this not work and have a negative impact on the outcome for the coachee? Or what do you try and guard against? Yeah, the tripartite agreement where it hasn't worked.
Oh God, I think that there might have been times where the organization perhaps lost a client because of coaching, but again, I wouldn't say that didn't work. Because usually the organization, I believe absolutely in transparency, but I also believe in confidentiality. So it's up to the client to manage in the coaching when the client says, you know what, I've been here 25 years and actually I think it's time for me to move on. And I say, well, look, you are absolutely the user client, but the organization is funding this relationship, and I think it's important that you make that as transparent as possible. Obviously, I'm not going to break confidentiality here, but we need to manage that for the for the third party in our agreement. So and often the organization will say, you know what, really get it. If she feels it's important that she moves on now, then that actually benefits us too. So I don't know. I'm
so how about when you have those, when you're involved in making those agreements in that tripartite way, when you've got the client sponsor and the coachee in front of you, how do you do anything different in relation to how you contract, or do you still try and follow the same model? What do you do specifically with the sponsor client?
We'll get very clear with the sponsor client about what her outcome is. What's good look like for the organization? How will you know that she and I have done our work here? That she's got what works for the organization. And right now, in terms of the outcomes that you've laid forward, I often use the scaling model. So scale of 1 to 10, how much of that gravitas or that confidence or that ability to lead does she have? Okay, so you say she's got 6. So what would 10 look like?
Yeah.
And then I say to the client, who's the leader who's in the room, how would you scale yourself? And she might say, actually, I'm surprised by 6. I would have put myself at a 4. So what do you need to do to get to 10? And how does their picture of 10 match with your picture? Because we need to, it's all got to be very clear. And it's got to be really adult. Tri-party agreements are, I used to get really nervous around them because I used to feel that we were making a child out of the user client and that, the organization was a parent. I don't really feel that way anymore, because I really try to manage the conversations absolutely transparently with all three of us in the room. I won't have a tri-party conversation separately with a sponsor. I really want the user to be in the room too. So I like them now. They used to make me very, very nervous. I used to get kind of seduced to sit with the sponsor and this kind of two parents against the child, and that actually is so destructive. It does. Yeah. Nobody wins from it. The organization doesn't win. Nobody wins. It's a drama triangle. It just doesn't work. It's not good. So okay. I'm conscious of time. Shall we move on to roles? So that's a pretty straightforward. The role that the coach plays, you could easily simplify that, couldn't you? You could say, well, I'm a coach. But it's more complicated than that. How do you, when you're coaching, who chooses the roles? How do you negotiate that?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think it comes onto the next slide as well, and in relation to the difference between role and style. And I suppose the thing that I try and get from the client is, in the way that they've approached this issue that we're going to work on in the past, I often try and get them to sort of think of the role that they've played in that and that stopped them coming up with an answer, and also get them to explore the role that other people have played in the fact that they haven't managed to resolve the issue. And so, and exploring the idea of, okay, so do I need to make sure I'm not playing one of those roles, and so therefore what role do I need to play? And I guess that thing that you were doing with me about, am I the supporter? Am I playing that sort of, staying in adult role to, be empathetic, not being too sympathetic and becoming the caring parent, as it were? What's going to work for them based on what hasn't worked up to now?
Yeah, that was.
Sorry, go on.
I was just saying, in our conversation, if you move on to the style slide, I really appreciate. I thought that was quite fun that you gave me that lovely metaphor, the explorer, the kind of assistant explorer, and that stuff, and that led so well into some of the style questions. I'm just conscious of time, which is why because I see I want to give our audience some time to ask questions. Yeah. But the style slide is a really important one, because every single time that you sit down and have a conversation, the style of that conversation is going to be different depending on who you're talking to. And I was delighted by the way that you invited me into the style, where you made it very clear the style of the conversation that you wanted. You wanted me to be a co-explorer. You wanted lots of time and silence between questions for you to think. And clients won't always be, they won't always be that prescriptive, but I think it was great for the audience to see a level and a sample of the kind of levels that you can take with that.
No, I absolutely agree. I think on the style one specifically, I think certainly for people who are first-time coachees, this is probably the one where they need a lot of guidance from the coach to really understand what that might mean, and explain to them why if we don't explore it, it then becomes one of the obstacles.
Yeah, completely right.
Because I think that style of questioning, especially if you've never worked together, you might have had a chemistry session, but this will be the first time you've got into the coach, and it can be a genuine obstacle. I mean, in your experience, what, as some of the people in the audience listening who are either internal coaches or external coaches, what typically do you find from clients comes up as the obstacles that they might see you put in front of them, or they might put in front of themselves?
Some of the obstacles that sometimes they say to me, you can be very. The audience can probably already see this in me or hear this in me. I get very enthusiastic. I get really excited, and sometimes clients say, "Look, it's why I chose you as a coach. I love your passion, but sometimes I need you to let me have the passion for myself," which is 100% accurate. I think that's right. It's like I need you today to really sit back. And when a client tells me that, I appreciate it hugely because it gives the style of that languorous, thought-provoking style that you want in the conversation we're going to have. It gives it that. Other obstacles, gosh, there's millions. People talk about inertia. People talk about fear. The big, fantastic time. Oh, I procrastinate. All of that. And what's great is the more they can be upfront, the more I can coach them to be upfront about the obstacles, the more we might talk about how we deal with it, so that we don't get into they go, oh, well, I really want you to be harsh on me. It's like, sorry, no, I don't. I'm not a parent. In an adult-to-adult way, how are we going to look at that if inertia sets in or if you don't make time? And a lot of conflict gets preempted by it, and therefore it doesn't happen. It's a really healthy conversation. What about obstacles?
Yeah, I mean, just to finish off on obstacles, then, I just really noticed from that example you gave at the beginning about your client that might say to you that your enthusiasm is getting in their way. I suppose the lesson to learn from what we've been talking about today is that actually, if you're not getting them into the habit of doing the contracting each session, how willingly would they offer up that information to you as the coach? My guess is they wouldn't, from my experience of having not done contracting well in some circumstances. That doesn't get them into the habit of giving you that feedback of how you become an obstacle. So I think that's really important.
I think you're 100% right. And, and it's so funny because clients now, by session 2 or 3, they go, okay, I know you're going to ask me what I want from this session, so let's begin contracting. And that's great. The fact that they kind of know that that's the routine. And I think in business, if people had that, at the beginning of every meeting, people are going to, oh, hi, Fred. Okay, here we are at the weekly team meeting. Okay, let's start contracting. It gets it into the muscle. I think you're 100% right about that.
Talking about other meetings, and I think one of the things we covered off before, and it sort of leads from that point you've just said, is that actually most of our conversation up to now has been about contracting in a coaching scenario, but I think the thing that we've I know certainly in the blog that we posted out that you wrote beforehand, is that how important contracting is in all interactions, whether that's a conflict meeting, an appraisal, whether it's the beginning of a project, a group meeting, giving feedback to people, following that simple model, however short or long amount of time you give to it, can be massively effective.
Well, I think absolutely. The full term for contracting is emotional contracting. And so what we're doing is we are looking at the feelings that run underneath this relationship and how we're going to be conscious of them and how we're going to consciously hold the richness of this dialogue and this relationship together. So I wonder. I'm really clear that we're about almost to time, and I'm wondering if we're denying anybody the asking of questions. How are we doing on that?
Yeah, I wonder if Ruth, if there's any particular questions that you think we could ask right at the end. I know we're tight on time.
Yeah, thanks, Neil. Dina, a couple of really good questions have come in whilst you've been speaking. One is, I think, linked to some of the things you were just talking about at the end there. One of our participants has made the observation that not everyone is as sophisticated in their thinking and self-awareness with their responses. So how do you get a coachee to reflect as deeply as Neil did and contract as effectively as he did?
Oh, it's a great question. I think we could do on this because I think it's such a great question. But I think the deeper you as a coach think, the more you model depth, the more you hold silence, the more presence you give to that dialogue, the more space you give for the client to think deeply. And the more also you make a presupposition that client or person sitting opposite you has the ability to think deeply, the more they will. The more you yourself get into the mindset that this person has richness, because I can guarantee you they do. I hope that doesn't sound too simple.
No, I think the other thing for me as well, and then, again, only speaking from my own experience, and I've definitely come across clients, especially those who are maybe, I think the participant was probably alluding to, come to coaching for the first time. It's just as the coach, for me, is having that bravery to stick with it and think, okay, let's just move, rather than just putting it to one side. I'm just going to get stuck into the coaching. Let's dispense with the contracting, because I think it's a way of setting up, the model for how you expect the rest of the coaching relationship to go. And so even if you're experiencing that they're not, or your perception is that they're not thinking as deeply as you might have hoped, so actually just, taking Dina's point that, well, they probably are. They might not be articulating it as well, but stick with it. And just as you would probe with the coaching questions when they're into their issue, do the same in the contracting. And actually don't be, I know, say, for me, not being worried that 10 or 15 minutes spent on the contracting might seem too long, because I think it's really important to spend that time.
Mm.
Yeah, thanks. I think time for...
Hope that's answered the person's question.
Just time for one more question before I think we sign off today. How do you handle it if the people that you are working with don't see the value in contracting?
It's interesting. We were discussing this before, and one of the things that we said was that you don't have to call it contracting, because I think that's one of the first triggers that makes people shut down and not want to do it, because there's that assumption around contracting that it's serious and it's putting people on the spot and it's very restrictive. And so there's nothing to say that if you get that sense that that's what the client's going to be like, that you have to call it contracting. It can just become a part of the conversation, and in your own head as the coach, you can be still following that model and giving yourself 10 or 15 minutes. There's no reason to say that they need to know that they're going through a contracting session.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, I'll give you just an example that pops into my head. A couple of days ago, I had a client who I don't know. She's taken over for somebody on maternity leave, and she rang me because I'm delivering a seminar in their offices. And I said, look, I'm really conscious that you said in your email you're on your way to a meeting, wondering how much time you have. And if this call is really productive for you and you get everything you need out of this call, how do we both know that? Now, I didn't say, let's contract. But she said, well, I really appreciate that question. And she said, so great. And I said, look, do you want me to keep an eye on time? I'll let you know when we're halfway through the call. She said, yeah, that's great. So, absolutely back up 100% what you've said there. You don't have to call it contracting. But boy, if you do it, you preempt a lot of conflict and confusion.
Absolutely.
Dina, Neil, thank you. As we are now 5 minutes over time, I think that's probably a place to draw this to a close. So thank you everybody thank you everybody for listening today. If you have got any further questions or things that you'd like to discuss, then please do get in contact with us. We're going to be sending out a survey just to get your feedback about today's webinar, and if there's any areas that we could improve on, or indeed any other future subjects that you'd be interested in hearing about. But thanks once again for taking an hour out of your day on a Friday, and I hope that we'll have the opportunity to speak to you, or that you'll join us on a webinar again in the future. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.